Ladies and gentlemen, the conversation continues. Good morning to everybody and welcome to CANTO Conversations. My name is Julian Wilkins. I'm Director for Government Relations and Public Affairs for Digicel Group, and I'm also the former Chairman of CANTO. I will be your moderator today, and with us this morning we have Siobhan James Alexander, CEO for Digicel St Lucia. Siobhan will give us the CEO's perspective on COVID-19, as well as discussing some of the many challenges and opportunities this pandemic has created. To our audience, please remember to post your questions in the chat, and please mute your microphones. Now, due to circumstances beyond our control, this morning we have a hard stop for our CANTO conversations at 10:30 Eastern Standard Time. So let's dive in, let's begin. And Siobhan, let me just say, you are the first Digicel CEO to appear on CANTO Conversations. So welcome and thank you for giving us your time.
Good morning, Julian, and thank you for inviting me. I like the fact that I'm probably the first, then I could set the bar.
I thought you might like that, you know. Now, I've introduced you as CEO St Lucia, but of course you actually have oversight over some other islands as well. Maybe you can just share with us.
Julian, thank you again for joining and welcome participants. Yes, St Lucia, I am Digicel CEO for St Lucia. I do have oversight for St Vincent and Grenada, and it's really about the synergies that we have. We have a lot of things that are in common, and so given that I've been CEO for 5 years in St Lucia, I do help my colleagues across the other two markets. And we're part of a wider structure, a wider region of 7 markets, but they're, over the OECS. So it is very much interesting times for us, and it's interesting to see how the different markets are reacting to COVID and what role we play in that.
I think you're quite right about that. I'm seeing that each market is quite different in what's, so it's really kind of interesting. So let's dive into the first question we have for you here. And of course, I will be picking up questions from the chat a little bit later on. So Siobhan, how has COVID-19 affected your organization in St Lucia? And in terms of its operations and revenue? And please feel free to elaborate.
Julian, like every industry, and I think this is very much unprecedented times for us. So even as a telecommunications company, our time and reaction was a little quicker in terms of that transition from being in an office into the work from home kind of policy where now you have to move. For us in St Lucia, there were other challenges because we do have a call center, and to get a call center working from home is a little more of a challenge than anybody would have ever dreamed. So operationally, we had to pivot, and that pivot for us had to be quick. In St Lucia, for instance, from March 15th into about March 23rd, that was our timeline to be able to, because lockdown started. And by the time that we went into 24-hour lockdown on April 1st, we had to be home and we had to be functioning. We are an essential service, and that makes it even more critical that our operations, in terms of what's in the office, our back office, our stores, how that would operate. So we had to create virtual stores. WhatsApp and all those content became our way of actually facilitating still those transactions that were necessary. Recharge, communication becomes the ultimate, it's part of Maslow's list of, it's no longer a luxury. And so that transition had to be precise for us, and we had to create clear plans. So from an operational perspective, we had to pivot really quickly. From a revenue perspective, as the markets closed down, and because we're predominantly prepaid, you could feel the difference in the disposable spend. And I know you know, as a telecommunications company, people would expect that, you know, we're still much, our revenue should be in the other direction, you know. But we are feeling the changes, and consumer behavior has changed within that. Some of the insights is because people are sitting at home, their habits change, right? What they listen to, where they see you, how you communicate with them has changed. And within that little time, we've had to do a lot of reassessment and determine how we change quickly to meet our subscriber needs. And you know, things like education became paramount, and helping in the health industry became paramount. So apart from just our own needs, we had to start becoming backbone for, you know, all the companies that now needed to transition. And that digital space became very important. So these were the shifts within the telecommunication space, and it's still very fluid.
So you had quite an extensive lockdown in St Lucia, right?
Yes, we did.
Mid-March there. Tell us a bit about your call center. That must have been interesting, having to move. How did that work out?
Julian, I can say that my IT team probably felt a little stressed in all of our, even in our, and we've used the playbook that we normally use for natural disasters, you know, our Marias and our Irmas. That kind of gave us a good business continuity guide. And even in that, we've never transitioned the call center. We've shut down the call center or transferred calls to another market. In you know, in hurricanes, etc. You have that. Right. Because everybody was in the same space, there was no transferring to a Jamaica or a Trinidad or any of our other centers. So it had to be that we needed to remain operational. And so we had to put in, you know, laptops. First of all, everybody had to move into a laptop. Then you're starting to look at connectivity at home, because those persons need to be constant. It's constant streaming. I think our IT guys deserve a good holiday after this, because we did transition. We used every different part of connectivity and VPN in, etc., to one, ensure that we protect consumer privacy, because now we're moving it from the confines of our building into homes. So we had to do that, and still, you know, ensure quality of care. So in terms of, you know, what we're guiding and how we're coaching our agents, we had that to do. And then we had to also consider that when you're at home, persons are probably still homeschooling. So how do you transition that? So, but we were successful. When we look at our scores, our NPS, etc., we haven't seen changes in the way our subscribers don't know where we're answering from, basically, which is great.
Right. And has St Lucia sort of reopened, or is your lockdown, are you still under curfew? Antigua, we're still under curfew from 11 p.m. to...
Julian, I think we've lost Siobhan for a minute. Do you want to talk?
Oh, okay. We've lost Siobhan. I didn't realize that. Maybe...
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, I'm here. I could hear you. I don't know. I lost, sorry.
Secretary General, I thank you for your observation. I think we're good.
Yeah, okay.
So that's what I was saying. Our lockdown has been you know, reduced somewhat now. And I just wondered if that's the same for St Lucia, and whether now businesses are opening up and you're starting to see a bit of a pickup.
Well, St Lucia went through a lot of phases. We've actually recently extended our state of emergency until September. So yes, we still have that curfew. As of yesterday, actually, our curfew moved from 10 to midnight, so midnight to 5 a.m. And that's I think more of a reminder that COVID isn't gone. We're not COVID free.
Yeah, exactly.
But, you know, we've done a very phased approach. So first it was essential services, opening, you know, supermarkets, etc. So we're in phase 4, where as of yesterday, bars could now open. They're looking at the hotels and putting in stringent protocols. You can now return to office within guidelines.
Your bars are
Yes.
open.
Yes, our bars opened yesterday.
Must be a lot of happy people. Anyway.
There have been a lot of happy faces hearing that. So the idea has been to try to rejuvenate that economy and to try to get persons back in. But as a market that is heavily dependent on tourism, it's slow recovery still. You see green shoots because construction has opened as part of it. So the local market is trying to rejuvenate outside of tourism coming in. And what that has done for us is we are now seeing the shifts. So you can tell when people are at home, you can tell when they're mobile, because their spending pattern changes, right? Even where they buy, recharge, etc. changes. So it's those kinds of shifts that we need to monitor on a day to make sure that we're actually servicing our customers.
Okay, and I'm just wondering, as you're speaking there at home, I'm assuming you are at home. As a CEO, how have you adjusted to working at home? How has that been?
Longer hours, Julian. The reality of it is that, you know, I was probably one of the persons that didn't know how that would transition. I have a 9-year-old son. He's homeschooling. I'm probably the worst teacher that you've ever met. But it's trying to balance. It's trying to balance that and still being in contact with your staff. So we have daily roundups. And I think the contact has actually increased from work from home versus when you're in the office, because you need to keep your finger on each part of the business, from the retail arm, which opened quicker than the back end support. But I think COVID has taught us that, you know, we need to look at the brick and mortar a little harder. And see how, I don't think we'll ever return to what the old normal was. There is a new normal. And, you know, retail space and back office space may change, you know, it's always better face to face, but it's proven that we can continue. There is continuity even if you're working from home. My hours are probably moved to 14 because you're just home and you don't commute. You're not losing that time anymore and you're just constantly connected.
I must say, I've been speaking to a lot of Digicel staff, and that's been a sort of common sort of analysis of it, is that we seem to be working longer hours. There's so many team meetings actually, rather than Zoom meetings, but it's a whole new experience, as it were. So let me just go back to some of my written questions I have here. So what have you been doing to ensure that your critical communications infrastructure remains working in the pandemic? Can you share some of the things you've been doing there?
I think, Julian, again, from a Digicel perspective, we're an essential service. We've always been an essential service. And whether it's a pandemic, hurricane, earthquake, our role in all of this is to ensure that everybody's connected. And more you see why connectivity is so important. So our whole dynamics from a company perspective, from our business continuity, fosters that, you know, first to go and first there is your emergency supply, your emergency center, which is your O&M, etc. So infrastructurally, considering too that we were also preparing for hurricane season, there's a checklist of things that we have to do, right?
Thanks for reminding me.
It's an essential. So we were already in hurricane prep. So from your gensets to making sure your batteries, making sure that you're servicing. So access, we're part of NEMAC in St Lucia. And so even in lockdown, we had access to our sites. So our engineers are ever available to ensure that our sites are very much up and running. and that our off island is also functioning, because as soon as persons, as you work from home, the pressure on the network is actually more, because persons have a longer time and they're actually constantly connected. So there are trends that we now look at, different ones. The technical team, I think, have been 24 hours going to ensure that, connectivity is up and available. Because consider that things like education is now dependent on connectivity, whereas in a classroom, face to face, you didn't need that.
Was, by the way. Someone just sneezed, but
yes. And then healthcare started to become very much dependent on connectivity as well, voice traffic. So the COVID lines and the accessibility to the doctors. So that's part of the relief that we actually assisted the government with in St. Lucia, to make sure that everybody remained connected. But from a back end, it was the playbook from Hurricane, making sure that the sites are up and available.
So in a sense, it was like the hurricane season came a little bit early, a few months early.
Yes.
Hurricane Mo, that's really good. So I know one of the things, of course, with everybody being at home, is everybody's there on Prime, or they're on Netflix, or, so how has your infrastructure handled the increase in traffic and the strain that you're seeing at this time? And also, linked to that, how have you promoted the responsible use of these resources by the general public?
So I think, Julian, from day one, it's the acceptance that consumer behavior is going to change. And, what are we looking at? So profiles, and looking at each site. So you now need to segment your network and understand where your pressures are coming from. And it was from day one, knowing that your network and your optimization, your skills had to change. And so from, let's say, ground zero, T-0, understanding what's happening, it was with the technical guys, do we need external bandwidth? Is it on-island pressure or off-island pressure we expect? So from an on-island perspective, optimizing your network, best use of your spectrum. Our good friend, Mr. Millet, would know this very well. I know he's connected. So it was best use of your spectrum, making sure, LTE, 4G, everything, that there's failover and there's redundancy. And then off island, looking at the trends, pushing out to those ISPs to make sure that you would properly provision. And per market, we've done this, and we've made changes based on what we were seeing. So it is fluid. It isn't just set it and go. It is constantly asking green or red, and where are we getting these pressures, and what do we need to tweak to achieve optimal use?
Right. So basically, we've been able to handle the increase in traffic. It's been a bit of a challenge, really. It's
a juggle. It's a juggle. And I mean, you need to understand, voice versus data, and what's your quality of service and what's your priority, where are people using most, and moving those dynamics. And to your point of, sensible and trying to educate persons, whereas you can try that, you can't dictate to people where they're going to use their bandwidth, unfortunately for us. So it is really trying to optimize that, right? And yes, you do see the protocols changing. So the WhatsApps and the Facebooks and the Netflix are, starting to rise in terms of use. Yeah. But on the international space, those OTTs have come to help us. So they have already changed, how much bandwidth you require to do a Netflix, and change their protocols. So a lot of it helped. And when they made those changes, you could tell that, there was relief on our side. So it wasn't necessarily things that we had to do, but their own understanding that, the rest of the world, and I guess because the whole world is in the same spectrum doing the same things, yes. We got relief from them. So, some of them dropped from HD and started to control the threshold, and that helped ease some of our pressure.
So there was some collaboration at least.
Definitely.
You know, because we're all stakeholders in this together. So it's good that that. And what are you seeing? Because we know that our voice traffic was already dropping before COVID, and of course everybody's going to data. What's happened to voice? Has there been any sort of changes, significant changes with voice? Everybody's at home, or actually, I know we're trying to get back out now, but do you see any noticeable difference there?
Not significant changes. I think, yeah, voice did become a thing again. It did actually, people remembered voice, exactly.
Yeah.
So there were changes, especially in the 24-hour lockdown, where people, I guess, needed to connect.
Right. Yeah.
But data is still very much where everybody's communicating.
Yes.
But you did find that rebalancing a little, not significant enough to kind of buck the trend that we've been seeing over the industry for the last 5 years. But you did find that your minutes were up on your network.
Okay.
But in 24 hours, once they become mobile, it changes again.
So hooray for voice, voice has made a little comeback there.
A little comeback, yeah.
But actually, you must have nailed the audience, because I'm checking the chats, and I'm not seeing any questions just yet, which means that you have nailed it. You've already answered all their questions. So very good. So why don't we just talk about? I'd like to know a bit about some of your initiatives that you've undertaken to support the citizens of St Lucia. Were there any special initiatives that you introduced during COVID-19?
Yeah, Julian, it like I said, the response from a Digicel perspective had to be holistic. And apart from just, the consumer end, there was the government aspect. And because the tide was changing so quickly, we were probably more apt to understand, some of the needs. So day 2 was focused on health. So, they were setting up a 311 COVID line. So, we've zero rated calls to that, so you didn't have to pay. And that was essential. Excellent. Because a lot of the relief program was going through that 311 line. Then 311, which was the response, the hotline, would have to refer you to a doctor should you require one. And so yes, we provided SIMs, we provided phones to all the doctors that were attached to the response. There were probably 40 or so doctors. So we gave them phones and data.
You gave them SIMs?
Yes, because we needed to make sure that there was transition into that. And those calls to those numbers also was zero rated. So from a health perspective, we were looking at contact tracing, and we became kind of a facilitator. So Julian, through this, we've understood that, we have really good partners, and that, even if that we couldn't provide some of the support, we did have experts in some of these areas that could help. So we've had conversations now with an MIT team that are assisting Government of St Lucia with the contact tracing element of it. Then from an education perspective, once we understood that, okay, schools are going to be closed, then they would be closed indefinitely, well, at least for term 3, we started having conversations with our partner, Microsoft, who came on board, really, really full steam, and allowed us term 3 of Teams free. And what did that mean? It means that the ministry could do virtual classrooms. And for a mom like me, it became really important. My son, on day number 1, when he saw his friends, they were elated, and just that teacher contact helped. So for term 3, we trained teachers. We helped facilitate training of teachers in that virtual space. And then we're not education experts, so we brought on our partners in the education space, and so we zero rated. And in other words, you could, even if you didn't have a data plan once you're a Digicel customer, there were a few sites that the ministry, ahead of the virtual training, because that took time to bring up, needed students to have access to. So places and partners like Learning Hub came on with free access. So we gave that. ABC Mouse, Scholastica, there was 6 or 7 sites that the ministry wanted to ensure students had access to. And we allowed persons to, no cost, once you're a Digicel customer connected to the Digicel network, you can connect. Microsoft Teams is also, if you are a Digicel customer, you can go on, you can hotspot from your phone and allow your child to have access to it. You know, WHO became one of the things that everybody needed to make sure, you know, what was an epicenter, etc. That became a separated site, and the government sites became that as well. So we continue to work as a partner for the government of St Lucia and a lot of the governments across the region to help facilitate that transition. And so our response from that social responsibility side was this. From our customer side, during lockdown, access, you know, understanding connectivity was important. We gave a relief package to both our prepaid and our postpaid customers, gave them data, gave them minutes so that they can connect. And we've done a lot of promotions, and those promotions are really understanding that people still need connectivity, but there are constrictions to their wallet. And so we've tried as much as possible to keep people alive, keep them connected. And so a lot of our programs are geared towards that, keeping them connected, understanding their state. But, you know, we have loyal customers and we need to be loyal to them as well, right? And so it's really about providing a response in a time of crisis, as we've always done as a company.
And what about, could you kind of touch, that's health. You've done a lot of, you've zero rated and things that are associated with websites. You've zero rated as well, which I think is great. Shows that we're working with you know, our different partners. But what about, so maybe you could expand a bit more on the education side of things. I know you did that for health. So what did you do? I mean, you touched on it earlier, but maybe you can a bit more on that.
So, I mean, Julian, it's a good thing that you pointed out that, you know, let me elaborate. So part of it is understanding that not every child had access. So we gave 500 MiFis to the ministry to distribute to, and what MiFis are like hotspots. So we gave them with SIM and data. We're covering that data for 3 months, which is term 3. So children that are disadvantaged, didn't have any access within their homes, but would need to be able to connect to the web.
Could actually switch on a network, have their own private network.
Exactly, and actually connect. So 500 MiFis went to the Ministry of Education for them to distribute. And then after that, we started to look at, you know, the websites that children need to log on to facilitate learning. And then we did the Microsoft Teams, which would facilitate virtual education. So it was a step-by-step. And out of all of this, we understood that there's a network, because we deal with so many different governments. We determined that there was a network that we so we actually 2 weeks ago did a webinar, brought our partners in, Clinton Foundation, etc. And we set up a network, an education network that we will take forward. And it's just for the response in the region, because we understand that post-COVID, there's a new normal. And we need to address that. I don't think we'll ever go back to what we were before COVID. So, you know, the response would have been 1, connectivity, 2, content, 3, what's the go forward? And that's where we're at right now. Okay,
I could talk to you forever. There's so much going on, but I just want to pick up 1 or 2 questions before I know that we have to close off. And in fact, I saw our friend Stephen Cummins. But I think you've answered that, picked up on that in the ICT literacy part. I think you've actually answered that one. But I've got a Facebook viewer here, Sergio Pengel. Now, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think he's an ex-minister.
Okay.
But he's asked, how can Digicel St Lucia invest in technology broadband infrastructure to enable on-offline emergency communication in preparation for the hurricane season?
So actually there is an emergency, and that's great that's been asked. We're actually mid-flight from St Lucia perspective in a national emergency telecommunications plan, which addresses that offline, because there is a spectrum that can be used across networks in case of emergency. And we're actually part of that collaboration. The first online stakeholder management is tomorrow in St Lucia. ITU is actually facilitating that, and it is definitely to understand that emergency response. How do we, from a network provider point of view, facilitate that, and to ensure in cases of disaster that there is still communication, especially from an emergency management. So we are part of that consultative process.
Time is really against us, but I will ask a question from Stephen Cummins. He's a senior broadcaster. I think he's based in Trinidad. He's asked, how important is regional connectivity via ICT? Do you see this as assisting the process of helping regional integration? And I guess being a regional CEO yourself, maybe we could finish on this one.
Actually, Stephen, you bring up a very important point. Part of the education response that we've had with, and we did actually, Julian, partner with OECS, that integration body, and we provided support both from a communications point of view and from physical cash. But back to Stephen's point, there's always benefit when we collaborate. And a lot of the times the regional response is key. So places like Sedima and Paho and Kafa become integral to any response that we have. And from a company, a Digicel perspective, from the ITC space, I think we've actually during COVID understood that there is also a regional response to the ICT response to any disaster in the Caribbean. And so from a Digicel perspective, we started to foster that change. Internally to us, we do it. We do that regionalization. But we now need to get the governments, the CARICOM governments to agree. And I think they are doing that, because when I look at some of their objectives, ICT, creating one regional space, is actually one of their core mandates. And so I think COVID has also said, yes, this is required, because even when we go to our partners like the Microsofts and we go to, the Ciscos, it's a regional response that we're asking for and not just an individual market. And there's definitely strength in numbers. So I am one of those that think that the regional approach is the best approach. There is much work to do in terms of, spectrum allocation and how we overlap and all of those things that need to be tabled at a regional level that, we can help facilitate, but we are just the facilitators and not necessarily policy driven. But there's definitely scope for this now, and we're apt to doing it now.
Sayo, I really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you for sharing your insights and your perspectives. Thank you so much, but we're going to close off there. To our audience, thank you for your time. Remember that the next webinar will be on Thursday, the 18th of June. That's this Thursday, the 18th of June at 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. You see it on the screen there. Please join the conversation when we focus on the future of telecoms after the pandemic. Our guest speakers for that session will be Garfield Sinclair, CEO BTC Bahamas and Vice President Northern Cluster, Jensen Sylvester, Country Manager Flow Barbados, and Curly Prescott, Country Manager Flow Trinidad and Tobago. So thank you, work from anywhere, stay safe, stay connected with CANTO Conversations. Goodbye.
Thank you, bye.
Thanks.